Well, one day we will have favorable or even ideal
Or even nice.
circumstances
Or even just kind of okay.
for recording a podcast.
Anything like nicer than functional.
This is barely functional. I mean,
It's firmly
functional
functional.
enough.
It is solidly functional. It's
It's
just...
just not convenient in any way.
yeah. But here we are.
And
That's
even
how
less
dedicated we
convenient
are.
than normal.
That's how
Right.
dedicated we are. We
We're
bring
at
you-
26% still.
To all two of you.
Yep.
The computer...
To where it was more convenient to grab my entire desktop out of my room and drag it out into the living room than it was to wait for my laptop, which didn't do a particularly great job of recording the podcast to begin with.
It's updating at 28% now.
It
Yep.
might finish by the time we get
It
done with the
might.
episode.
Right.
Wouldn't hold my breath because we're a podcast after all.
No, it would be kind of an uninteresting podcast if we all just held our breath.
Yeah.
Imagine like a swimming tutorial podcast. And it's like, okay, now hold your breath like this.
I am 100% keeping that.
Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
I was hoping it would go on longer.
Yeah.
Oh, you cracked like, okay, now we're free to go.
It was sort of a chicken
It
contest.
was a game of chicken.
I wasn't actually holding my breath, but I was maintaining
I
sound.
was.
I was.
Oh. Well, you're better men than I.
We committed to the bit.
We always commit to the pit. That's
Always.
our
That's
MO.
what you do.
We must.
We always commit to that.
You did not commit. You must be punished.
Yeah. I'm legit.
I
I was
hear-
too legit to quit. But now I'm unlegit. And for that reason, I must therefore quit.
Is that a
Hot Rod?
dodgeball reference?
Hot
Or
Rod- a Hot Rod.
So
Yeah.
I feel like I've seen it because I haven't seen Dodgeball, but I've seen Hot Rod.
Yeah.
I feel also you just quote that movie. Even before I saw it, it was one of those things you just quoted. I'm like, that's from somewhere.
It is.
And now I've seen it. It's not like what 2 years ago.
Maybe about
Maybe.
that. Yeah. I've most of
like-
the times I've watched it now is when I'm showing it to people. It's kind of like
It's
Fantastic Mr. Fox that way.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that, or like there's a group of people who've all seen it and love it a lot, and let's just watch it again. But it's been a while since I've been in that sort of social setting.
Yeah.
Speaking of those, I have been on a bit of a Wes Anderson kick myself lately.
Oh yeah,
Oh.
And I have watched Grand Budapest Hotel and
Ah.
Moonrise Kingdom now.
what do you think of the pair of them? Are they worth watching?
I think they're worth watching. I'm undecided about what I think about Moonrise Kingdom yet. Grand Budapest is it just is what it is, and I like it for what it is. And the thing about Wes Anderson is that he gets real close to saying something interesting, and it's not abundantly clear whether he ever gets there.
Yeah,
Sure.
And in the service of being fun and quirky and artsy, which is the main intent. So like, with respect to that, I find them interesting films, but not necessarily.
In the conclusions that they come to, it's more like in the questions.
Well,
they
it's
have.
not even. They come to conclusions, just whether
Sure.
they're meaningful,
Sure.
yeah.
and especially like Moonrise Kingdom. I'm still undecided what I think about what they concluded.
Gotcha.
It's at least really interesting to think about.
Because it's like we're a couple of 10-year-olds like run off
Like,
into the woods
yeah,
and like
11-year-olds.
Yeah, 11-year-olds like they're like let's run away and get married and live the rest of our lives, but they're like kids. Yeah, that's about the extent of what I know about that movie.
It's the gist of it.
Yeah. The new film on Netflix, I haven't had a chance to watch yet. The one with Benedict Cumberbatch. What was it? The story of Henry
Bumper
Sugar or
sticker
something?
Camelback.
Well, no, it was yeah. The story of like Henry Sugar or something like that. Which is
Something
it's apparently
like
like from what I'm gathering, like a verbatim, like reading of the book and acting it out.
Oh,
That sounds quite Wes Anderson. For me.
Yeah,
yeah.
Kind
of
of
course.
like evocative of your Romeo and Juliet with Leo DiCaprio.
Oh yeah.
That kind of vibe.
So yeah, there's those projects, I suppose, and then Asteroid City. I haven't really had an opportunity to watch that yet, and
The French Dispatch
yeah,
came out somewhat recently. There's one other notable one that is eluding me at the moment. It's one of his older ones.
yeah. I mean, I think those are most of the ones of recent memory.
I've only ever seen the ones you've seen.
Fantastic
so,
Mr. Fox and
Isle of
Isle
Dogs.
of Dogs. Yeah. Yep.
I know my younger sister watched Grand Budapest Hotel for like a film class that
Sure.
she took as an elective. But
Probably talking about composition
probably.
or shot
don't know.
composition.
She was like, it was weird. And
It certainly is that.
Our mutual brother Andrew was like, he's seen it and it's like it did quite tickle his fancy.
Yeah. In his opinion, the best Wes Anderson films are probably the animated ones because it prevents the sort of PG to PG-13 rating prevents Wes Anderson from some of his worst tendencies with the vulgarity and whatnot,
Yes.
quote unquote artistic vulgarity. But so that's the caveat as a Catholic watching these films, I suppose.
Yes, quite. As I understand it anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't I've been watching I've been doing some like artwork on my computer. I've been watching the Teen Titans show in the background.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the way through season 1. And so far it's fairly basic action kids show, but also with some decent moments of character
Because
work
this
here and
aired,
there.
what, early 2000s?
Oh, early 2000s, yeah.
Yeah.
Like,
I remember seeing episodes occasionally, but I was never like particularly drawn to it, I
Right.
guess.
one thing I think is kind of interesting, I'm like most of the way through season 1, and like each individual character has gotten little like episodes highlighting them as individuals and like giving them a little mini arc in it.
Yep.
Robin has stayed fairly stagnant. Like as like everybody knows Robin, so he needs less introducing to an audience.
Yeah.
But also like
especially in
he's-
that time.
Right, exactly. Because like who's you know who Robin is. Everybody knows who Robin is on a surface level. Not everybody knows who Beast Boy is.
Yeah.
Particularly in the early 2000s when the show first came out. I mean, nowadays they do because the show came out. But like, so I think, so far it's like, it's fun and basic, and I understand why people who grew up with it as kids think it's a great show. I'm kind of hoping like later seasons
Because this
get a
would have
little
been
more
like what,
interesting.
Cartoon Network probably?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Because Cartoon Network is owned by Warner Bros. And Warner Bros.
Yep.
Does all the DC stuff.
Yep.
So anyway, I've been just kind of, since we have the 1 month of Max, I've been kind of cruising
Month
on
of
that in the
Max.
background. The month of Max.
Yeah.
Speaking of Max, it's been forever since I've seen Get Smart.
Oh,
Holy
yeah.
moly.
Like the show?
The show, yeah.
Yeah.
Or the movie. But, like, the show's... I like
The show's
show.
better. Like, the movie's all right. It's kind of fun.
It's fine.
The show is definitely better.
Yes.
And it's one of those things, though, where it's like we watched it so much growing up that I just have never really had an interest in going back to it.
Sure.
Like, if it was on or something, I'd be like, oh, yeah, this would be fun, kind of reminiscing about it.
There was a chunk of my childhood where it was like something we watched a lot.
Yeah.
Because
when it was on TV Land regularly.
we didn't have TV Land, though.
Oh, okay. You have like the disc set?
We had a friend who had the show on DVD, and we borrowed it from them, and we're like, oh, this is fun.
Yeah.
We eventually got all the DVD box sets.
Yeah.
And so we watched through it like for a chunk, and then like just kind of put it back on the shelf for a while.
Yep.
So I didn't watch it like nearly as long, but I watched it to completion. Mm-hmm. There's a couple episodes in there that I'm like, that thinking about it, I'm like, dude, I could go back to some of the episodes with, why am I blanking on the main Chaos
Villain.
guy's name? I'm only the only name that's coming to mind in relation to Siegfried.
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 Yeah. Siegfried.
There's some like the episodes with Siegfried were like peak Get Smart episodes because you had like two equally imbecilic geniuses going up.
But one
against each
thinks
other.
he's way smarter than he is.
Right. So like, because like Siegfried's just Maxwell smart, but on Chaos's side, and so just seeing these two stupid dudes just butt
Having a
heads,
battle of whatever brain cells they have.
and having Starker and 99 do most of the heavy lifting while they just be absolutely hilarious. It's and the one thing about it is that it's almost carried by how insistent it is on using the running gags every time. Because you see them coming a mile away.
Well, Max is always using gadgets that don't work.
Oh, well, yeah, but like even more than that, you've got the "Would you believe?" or you've got the old
I told you not to tell me.
I told you not to tell me that the cone of silence,
Yep.
the old Wilbur in the drapes trick.
Yep.
Or what old trick happens at the
The
episode.
old convoluted name trick.
That's either a white manhole cover or the second biggest aspirin I've ever seen.
Second biggest?
Right, and it's always the second biggest.
Leaving you wondering what the first biggest
Right,
would have been. So yeah, it's just great old comedy
good
writing.
good old TV, peak like a Cold War satire.
Yeah, and then every season he has a different car he drives up in the intro, like an old sports car.
Yep.
What have you? Yeah, it was a good show, and then that show, and then Leave It to Beaver. We got like DVD box sets for my older sister when she was in college, and so sometimes when we'd be hanging out at her place, we'd watch some of those. Besides when they would air on TV Land, which was like that, the news and EWTN were like the only things we ever, and History Channel were like the only things we ever played on TV.
We had one of those. You know how like they're always at thrift stores now, but like those sets, those like DVD sets that are like not full seasons or like complete one show. It's just here's 2 episodes of I Love Lucy.
Yeah.
Here's 2 episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies. Like 2 episodes of Leave It to Beaver. We had like one of those things where it was like just a couple random episodes from like a smattering of old TV Land shows.
It's funny, like understanding enough of old TV to where UHF is still really funny. Because
it's really funny regardless, but like there's a layer of like meta joke that he dives into.
like the whole the Money for Nothing cover, but it's like the Beverly Hillbillies theme song word
But
for
also
word.
it's a direct recreation
Of the music
video
yeah.
by the same animator
Yep.
because it was a breakthrough animated music video because it was the first one to be done in 3D.
Yep.
It's several layers of joke.
Yep.
It's funny.
Story about a man named Jed and his incredibly lost cause mom. Back when you could joke about that. Speaking of joking about things that it might be viewed as poor taste nowadays, we're the Palladium Papists. I'm James.
Nathan.
Hi, Riley.
We don't really have a bumper for this week's episode.
We don't.
I'm just
don't.
going to throw the Saltcast bumper in here because it's
you
my
want to.
favorite.
It's funny.
It's not really a Saltcast, but we need a bumper.
It's not a Saltcast. I mean, in the maybe loosest of senses.
Yeah, I suppose in a very loose sense.
There are
We're just
friction points where we might get salty.
we
but
be out here managing expectations. So, yeah, we're trying something different.
enjoy the bumper, but this is something different.
Yeah.
Saltcast warning. Saltcast warning. Saltcast warning. Saltcast warning.
This is a big bummer for me.
We can't call our segment and now for something completely different because that's obviously been done before. But yeah, so we're doing what we initially set out
what would we call
very
this,
much to not do.
We would
At
do
one
something
point.
alliterative like
Yeah.
we always do because I like alliteration. And it's fun.
alliteration is fun. It's catchy.
It's topical.
Tangential topics.
Tangential topical tropes.
I mean,
Something along
I
those lines.
think
We'll
our
workshop it a bit.
topical things are going to be more broad than
Yeah.
talking about tropes, but we
That's
are
for sure.
talking about
We are
a
talking
trope
about tropes today. We're the troping tropists. Anyway. Oh, geez. How many of these people are real? When you put a couch on Facebook Marketplace, man.
You just have like all of the first name, last name, or like just first name, female names with an AI generated, like not very clothed PFP.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Facebook is the Wild West, man. Anyway. So yeah, we're doing something a little different this week. We're talking about, in this instance, the topic of sort of the rebellion trope in films, particularly within
in stories
the last,
in general.
and stories in general. Yeah.
Just like altogether too often, like you see that
the rebels the good guys?
That rebel is almost synonymous with good guy in pop culture in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I mean, the most obvious instance of this would be Star Wars is probably what's primary in most people's psyche.
Although it's funny, the original trilogy had the rebels, right? And then the sequel trilogy you had the resistance as the good guys because you had to have an oppressive force being the bad guy.
Yeah.
Excuse me. But prequel trilogy, the separatists, the people rebelling against the status, they were the bad guys. So it was kind of weird to think about rebels as being like the good guys trope, but then Star Wars rolls back on that.
Yeah.
But also is telling a larger story. But
yeah. So yeah, that would probably be the most clear example, but
like also there was just a bunch of stuff. You got Hunger Games and
all of your young
Divergent
adult
and
fiction,
Ready Player One, and just all this stuff for like this
every
small
YAF
rebel group.
novel for the last 50 years. That's not.
Well,
There's no example of YA that isn't resistance literature. Like Mistborn is like that too, and
The Wheel of Time, Aragon.
Well, the Wheel of Time, it's kind of different.
Yeah, I suppose.
Aragon certainly.
Yeah.
Wheel of Time's a bit.
Aragon is Lord of the
but
Rings.
Is a ripoff of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings combined. So. Big Bad is my dad.
Actually, with a slight twist in Aragon's case, but yeah. There is a character whose big dad is the bad.
Daddy issues?
Yeah.
Just traumatize your dad back.
I love that one. But yeah, there's some common threads, with or common themes with like rebellion in media these days, where it's just like oppressive,
It's just becomes so ubiquitous,
vaguely fascistic force, and we must stand up and fight against them by overthrowing the world order and making a world new, full of freedom and goodness and flowery candy. I don't know.
Sunshine and rainbows, lots of rainbows.
It is impossible to view this trend with media without the context of World War II having a massive, outsized impact on popular culture since
it happened.
the war had happened. Yeah. Because, a lot of the Hollywood people of like the 80s and 70s, 80s, and 90s, your Spielbergs, your the Scorsese. When did Scorsese get started?
I
want to say early 90s. I don't know for sure off the top of my head.
But yeah, you're George Lucas, you're Spielberg, you're like all these people who made like sort of the touchstone films of like those decades. Were very heavily influenced by the time in which they grew up, or like shortly before they grew up in some cases, where like, and even to this day, like Hitler, Germany, the big fascists are the big bad. Well,
like in a culture devoid of like God and the devil, like the Nazi Party and Hitler are the closest thing to objective evil that the relativist culture will recognize.
Yeah.
The other thing is like
Been sort of mythologized almost.
Immediately following World War II, you didn't see it quite as much, but like definitely post 60s, which had its own whole revolution.
There's a lot of preoccupation with the Cold War
and also anti-war,
Russia.
like your Vietnams and stuff. It's like
Stanley Kubrick.
That was about the time when like I don't know, like sticking it to the man.
Yeah.
The man became the bad guy.
Yeah.
Like 1984.
Yeah,
Although
the
I
civil
think
rights
that book came
movement
out way
and
earlier, but like
college protests and stuff during the 60s and the hippies and all that stuff. But so there's sort of this at least in the American sort of zeitgeist, this idea that if you rebel against the powers that be, and overthrow XYZ system, you're going to achieve freedom for you and your friends. Now, all that being said, I'm trying to figure out. There was a time where I had this like much more succinctly put. I'm trying to reach back and get.
We've got air to fill, so
That's true.
Just
work it out. Work it out.
So
We'll talk it out.
the question I would like to pose is rebellion for rebellion's sake or at all universally good?
I think that's a pretty easy no,
Yeah.
right? So
Right.
the question then becomes, what are the conditions under which
Yeah.
rebellion is a good thing?
And this
and
is
why, more to the point, why is this so prevalent?
What makes it resonate with us?
Yeah.
Why
Like,
does it continue to stick almost 80 years after the event, which kind of catalyzed it becoming such a popular thing?
And that wasn't even like a rebellion. That's just us recognizing a fascist regime as being evil. I mean, obviously, as Americans, right, we have like our founding fathers were rebels, right? There's a little bit of that, but also the Confederates were rebels.
Yeah.
So there's a little there's both sides to it.
Right. I think, Marxism is obviously a non-zero part of this equation. It's kind of that favors and in fact asserts that revolution is necessary in order to achieve this kind of utopian political organization. So, like you're talking about in the kind of 60s student protests, like communism is very tied up in all of that.
You have
So-
Howard Zinn and all these like Noam Chomsky and all these guys that are sort of stirring the pot a bit with spreading their ideas around in the U.S. and throughout academia, which was kind of where that got its start.
So that's very much a part of it too. It's just like the revolution is good and necessary, and overthrowing the powers that be is an inherent kind of movement, and this is just how it happens. This is how we reach a perfect society, by gradual revolutions against the systems which present themselves.
Yeah. It gets to the point though where when you run out of dragons to slay, you have to start propping up new ones because, we must be constantly
Right.
revolting.
Whatever system emerges is just obviously not quite there yet. Short of the Marxist worker utopia, everything is insufficient, and you have, like the people have the responsibility to rebel against that every time it arises.
And there's something notably missing from this mindset, right? It's sort of the Catholic idea of culture and building. It's different because
Like whenever something gets built, everybody just wants to tear it down.
yeah. Because you think about
Alternatively, we could work with what we've got and of course, demand improvement where improvement is necessary.
right, because like Jesus himself came to the world and did not abolish the Jewish law, but rather fulfilled it.
But nor did he abolish Rome, as many of his
He just
Jewish
had it
compatriots
over
expected
time.
him to.
over time. I suppose you could say he
Over time.
he took
In
over
his way.
Rome. Yeah, in his way. Yes, through hearts and souls, as it were. But like sort of this, I mean, and the whole story of like creation and redemption and like Christ's second coming, right? Is that like he's renewing the world and bringing the kingdom of God to the world he created, right? It's like with ultimately where we're headed in history, like at the the end of time, whatnot. So that's sort of the Catholic view of history, I suppose. You contrast that with every time something needs to change, we need to tear everything down and start from scratch.
You don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
It is.
And there's
Except apparently everyone does.
yeah.
Yeah.
So think about, and this isn't even like in the veins of, the Empire was right meme, where
right.
you recontextualize things from the empirical point of view. But at the same time, when you think about instances of which revolutions caused untold suffering and accomplished little, like the French Revolution, for instance, or, insurgencies in the Middle East or what have you, it becomes pretty apparent, like we said earlier, the obvious answer to is rebellion always good? No, it's not for its own sake. and a lot of what we see, it's something that to use, I guess, Hollywood as it's something that the elites in Hollywood like to use the trope to. Rebellion has sort of become like almost a given now, where it's just like, that's sort of this heuristic, I guess, has been developed. Rebels good. Very seldom do you see an instance, like I suppose Andor, when like was the first instance where you understand that people, even who you would consider quote unquote the good guys, are capable of doing bad, questionable things.
And even the bad guys are doing what's right in their understanding of the world.
Yeah.
As limited as it may be. Right. So there is like stories that delve into the complexity of that kind of side of the war.
Yeah.
But like, generally speaking, a lot of these rebel stories are like the evil fascist empire is very evil. Mm-hmm. It's like everybody recognizes that it's evil. The story recognizes an objective evil, even if the culture around us doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
But in fiction, there's a draw to the idea of an objective evil.
Yeah. To
rally against. As simple and straightforward and kind of dumb as some of them are. But like, because it's, it's truth that there is objective evil. As Catholics, we believe that. Mm-hmm. As Christians, we should believe that. As people should recognize that there's some things that, and they recognize that, like, Hitler bad, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying something controversial when I go Hitler bad.
Yeah.
So, like, even if like they don't proclaim it outwardly, there's an inward like desire to like to
stand up to evil and to do what is just. Like
mm-hmm.
that's the good desire behind all that.
And now we've reached a point where enough like sacred cows have been killed and whatever, metaphorically speaking, that counterculture, rebellion, sticking it to the man is now the culture. I think it's safe to say.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So what does rebellion even mean when it's the status quo? What the rebels of yesteryear fought for is now the status quo. Rebellion is just now conformity to a different set of beliefs and ideas.
And, as I said, like, this still isn't the perfect thing.
Mm-hmm.
We've not achieved utopia yet.
No.
So in that, it's coherent if you're using Marxist kind of categories and ideals, which
mm-hmm.
obviously those are what we have to contend with. Like,
mm-hmm.
given those assumptions, like it's perfectly coherent.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to confront it on the basis of those assumptions.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And even on a sort of, I guess I don't know if ecumenical would be the right word, but like you can even trace it further back from Marx all the way to the Protestant Reformation. Yeah. And the Enlightenment. But like, like a lot of people's view of the church whenever, outside the Catholic world, whenever, you look back at the Middle Ages, people just, call them the Dark Ages, assume the church was just this big, fat, greedy, corrupt institution. And
in
there were certainly
media, they make them out to look like straight up fascists, even.
Yeah.
like an evil empire that needs to be rebelled against by Robin Hood in that one dumb movie.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I hate that.
And
movie
in that
so
one dumb
much.
Castlevania series.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, because like there's a couple reasons. I was at first I heard it's good, and I'm like I've heard people like it, but I see the stuff from it. I'm like, this doesn't feel like Castlevania.
Like the
Where's the
Netflix show?
music? I need some juicy like Baroque and roll. it's rock / classical, and it's so good.
Where's my lossy audio whip cracks?
Right, exactly. That plus season 2, 3, and 4 stray from established canon like stuff and just go off the deep end with original content, and all that original content is good church bad, and the monsters are now a minority that's oppressed by the church. Mm-hmm. Even though like you're turning blood-sucking vampires and like creatures of the night and stuff like that and equating them with minorities, that's a bad look.
Yeah.
that might be problematic. I don't know.
Is this the Netflix show?
The Netflix
Yeah.
show.
Okay.
Yeah. The games are fine for the most part. A couple like instances of like that's not theologically sound.
That's not how that works.
There's like a line in one of them where it's like, if God is truly good, there must be evil, and I'm like, that's not how.
We're
that
not
works.
Manichaeans.
Nope.
Evil is the negation of good.
It's not. It's not a thing that must occur
It's
naturally
the
to oppose.
absence of good.
Yeah.
We're not Zoroastrian dualists.
So like, Castlevania tangent, I guess.
Yeah.
But it's kind of relevant points. Like establishing that evil is only privative is a really important point. Like, we're secretly Manichaean. I think
Yeah.
a lot of people, insofar as without the metaphysical baggage that comes with that.
Yeah.
But just like
Like
evil and good are opposing forces, and it's kind of Hegelian. Therefore, I mean it's Marxist. Therefore Hegelian. But yeah, just like evil being having its own ontology as non-negative of good, and that's like, yeah, it gets tired after a while. When I think Aquinas, this is one of his most astute observations, is that nobody does evil qua evil. Namely, that nobody
There's no
does
Dr.
something
Evils.
evil like, this is evil, I know it's evil, and I'm doing it willingly as evil. He asserts that human beings aren't capable of doing that, whether they think they are or not. You know, we can be told that something is evil, but whenever we choose something evil, we are choosing it under the aspect of good. When we choose, for instance, stealing is an easy example. You say, like, when I steal something, I'm not doing it because I'm stealing it. I'm trying to secure for myself
Something
enough to eat, or like the resources to feed my family, or whatever, you know. Or even if you're just like a high profile thief, you're doing it to provide for yourself, to maintain your reputation, all sorts of good things under, you know, evil things under the aspect of good. So that's an important clarification, that people actually aren't capable of that. They're capable of not having their hierarchy of goods properly in order and choosing subordinate and goods that, you know,
They're choosing
they
something
aren't the
they
highest good, and in fact are oftentimes destructive.
They're choosing things they subjectively see as a good they desire.
Only cartoon characters do evil things because they're evil and they think being evil is kind of great. Which those characters can be fun to watch. They can be a silly good time to watch.
Yeah.
Like the Emperor in Star Wars is kind of just a stand-in for the devil in this case, but also he's played with just such camp that it's just kind of delightful to watch him be evil and throw things at Yoda.
And even then, you can argue that he's pursuing like the good of power and authority and leadership.
Right.
Like, you know, unless it's like incredibly cartoonish and just like so detached from reality that there's nothing substantial being talked about, you can almost always see the good that someone is trying to get when they act for anything.
Although, I mean, you still see instances of just acts of evil in that.
Right. And you perceive the injustice that those evils are. And your conscience is riled, and you can see like, man, this is really bad.
Somebody should
And-
rise up against that.
Yeah, you have this instinct to right the wrong. And the way we know how to do that in modernity is revolution. So, not to poo-poo the instinct per se, like, that's kind of the broad point I would like to make about this whole discussion, is like, it's good that you want to correct injustice. All of you who wish to rebel and are kind of captivated by these rebellion stories.
Are you going to go the St. Catherine of Siena route and write a bunch of letters to the Pope until he finally listens to you and moves back to Rome? Or are you going to nail your 99 theses on the door of the church or whatever? And
95, so.
Yeah, 95, right.
Or occasionally Joan of Arcs are called to action. There is times and places when fighting back and revolution are truly necessary for the current state of things.
And sometimes
that's
revolutions,
not every state, though.
revolutions, to quote a certain other Catholic podcaster, are oftentimes groups of people saying, I think me and my friends should be in charge.
Which that's more and more what current like media, pop culture, and like social revolution is trying to be.
Yeah. It's very little about actually correcting. A lot of what we see is like very little about actually correcting evil and things like that. It's
You and your group has been in charge for long enough. It's my turn to be in charge. I want to sit in
I
the big
could
chair
definitely do it better than you.
because it will be better for me specifically when I do it.
sort of that main character syndrome.
And
But
there's
those
a
are the-
lot of main characters in Rebel series.
But it's
Rebel
like
stories.
it's sort of a feedback loop of people growing up. I mean, I'm not saying that the sole cause of people having this rebellious mindset is because they've been steeped in these stories and like tropes and stuff.
It's more of a
However,
byproduct of the culture, but
however, they are certainly formed in that mindset to where the heuristic of rebel equals good has been something people are just like accustomed to at this point.
That's one of the things I find interesting about Mistborn is that in its kind of YA way approaches that very topic. Like, me and my friends being in charge is still like, we don't know how to run a government. Like,
Yeah.
one of us is fairly sincere and kind of like a natural leader and stuff, but it's just like trying to do it good is never going to end up working out. Like, me and my friends are not in fact really great. Now the previous tyrannical ruler was really awful and we lived horrible lives under that, but it doesn't just magically make everything better when me and my friends take over.
And also, we just finished watching Ahsoka, right?
Yep.
And in this show, there's the character Hera Syndulla. She's one of the main characters in Rebels. She's like a pilot and now a general in the New Republic. And she hasn't stopped rebelling. She's like continuing to go against orders just because she wants to do things for her friends. Like, and she's the hero and she's the good guy. She gets away with her rebellion against the New Republic that used to be
bureaucracy.
the rebels, and they should be the good guys.
And
But
they're-
now they're the established government, and they're a bureaucracy that gets nothing done as they sit on their thumbs. And so like now that the rebels are in power, they are a force against the good guys trying to get stuff done, and therefore they need to rebel against former rebels. So it's. The show's all right, but like that part
this
of it
is
was,
this is probably the extent of the discussion we're gonna have
Yeah.
on Ahsoka in the podcast.
but like looking at that, I'm like, it's just continuing rebellion to kind of no end, even when like the good guys are in charge and things should be fixed.
you have to oppose the conformists by rebelling in the exact same way that we do.
And also, part of me thinks that like maybe that's Hollywood's way of like distracting from some deeper problems they got going on.
Yeah.
But that's a different topic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Post another thing too that's sort of become tiresome, like, is like sort of postmodernism at this point. Constantly questioning
What does postmodernism even mean, James?
Well, modernity is like the idea that it's like sort of the idea of progress, right?
Not quite. Modernity is a bit hidden. Progress is really more of a postmodern notion, actually. Modernity is kind of this turn from the theological and kind of metaphysical into, it's just this focus upon man and what man can do. So it goes from God and God's role in our lives, which is bracketed and still kind of maintained by most modern philosophers, even though a lot of people like to accuse them of being atheists. None of them were. But they wrote as if they were, because they thought that that's just how you had to do philosophy. You had to examine the subjective, and you had to examine, like, what is man's capability? What is the role of man? And, of course, the historical context behind all of that is you've got all these, like, 100 Years' War and all these sort of things, like, with the Protestant Reformation and, Catholics fighting against Protestants. And there's like, okay, because we have to figure out how to live together without killing each other. And so philosophy came up with this system.
What if we wrote down all the things we agree about on a piece of paper?
That's essentially, like, there's more to it than that. But
almost
that's
like a Bible.
this is like, it just reduced what we can possibly agree upon and said we have to be able to be free to pursue our own ends independent of this kind of common stuff we hold. And over time, that chunk of common stuff has just been gradually chipped away at until there's practically nothing left now. And post-modernity is disillusionment with all that crap,
Yeah.
which is an extremely broad thing. Pope Benedict XVI is extremely postmodern. And so I pick bones with people who say, I hate postmodern philosophy. I'm like, no, you don't. You hate particular strains of postmodern philosophy for good reason.
Atheistic postmodernism.
But like, there's a lot of really interesting and worthwhile postmodern things to study. People are just throwing everything in baskets without actually knowing anything.
Right. I guess the more popular forms we see of postmodern.
Your Nietzschean postmodernism.
Yeah, that sort of
your
thing.
nothing matters and everything sucks and wubba dub dub.
And just kind of,
Yeah.
suspicion for suspicion's sake. Just kind of question everything all the time. Never trust anything that anyone else tells you.
Which is hardly a way to live life, because it turns out at some level, at some point, you have to trust another person and engage in relationship if you want to be
if you want to exist.
Yeah.
Like, your life will not be enriching at all. You'll be pretty miserable.
Yeah.
If you try to do that, I guarantee you, your life will be miserable if you live that way. And I think most people who live that way are miserable. They kind of lean into that and say like, yeah, that's just how it is to be enlightened, you just, or you could be, joyful, take the suffering as it comes in a Christian way.
You could have fruitful relationships with those around you. You
have really cool stuff like phenomenology in the postmodern strain that kind of re-enchants reality, like makes reality unproblematic and just like examine your experience. It's kind of cool, actually. So, yeah.
Yeah. Who rebels against the rebels?
The rebels.
Do not ask for whom the rebel rebels. He rebels,
for the
Yeah.
Like, we don't get very many stories about establishing or reestablishing a
Just society.
a society. Like, the biggest example of a story like that is Lord of the Rings, where like the end of it, like the thing that that fixes things and brings things together, is the crowning of a new king.
The
crowning of the king that was always the king.
Right.
And by rejecting the source of
Rejecting the source
untold power.
Right. But like, you just put a patriarch in charge of the world and that fixed things. That does not fly in the modern time.
Yeah, there's a hierarchical order to the universe.
The world is messed up because a patriarch left the throne.
Yeah.
Which, that's the solution to all the problems in modern like stories. Which turns out it's not always the solution.
Yeah, that's an interesting point you bring up. Because in Lord of the Rings, the struggle is not between, the rebellious faction good guys and like the oppressive power, because there's certainly an oppressive power,
Right.
but evil is seen as more of a corrupting, privative force in Lord of the Rings.
Right. Evil is
Almost like the author was Catholic.
corrupts.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you know that
That's
Tolkien was
almost
Catholic?
cheating.
What? It's like John's like probably screaming at the podcast right now, saying, "Just talk about Lord of the Rings, you cowards." Maybe we will someday.
We are currently.
Tangentially speaking. Anyway, but yeah, evil is a very privative, corrupting force that, the forces opposing it are gradually growing weary to, like, throughout Lord of the Rings. And
It's like the
barely managing to hang on.
It's not a fascist like evil organization. It is coming from within the
This
hearts of men
desire
themselves.
to unmake the current order in the image like that
In
I
his own
prefer.
image.
It's not political. It is. I mean, it has political ramifications, but the struggle is not a political one.
Right.
Yeah.
And therein lies the difference.
Yeah. Because, what did Satan say? I will not serve. That's like very much Sauron is Satan,
Yeah.
or well, I guess
Essentially.
Morgoth
A
is
very good image of,
Yeah.
if not a total one-to-one representation, because Tolkien's not really a fan of that.
Now, I'm not saying every instance of rebellion. It's like, have fun being Satan.
But also, like, because there are the good rebels, and they're like, you can look at the story and say, this story is about defeating evil. I still love Star Wars. I'm not saying Star Wars is wrong to have rebels as the main characters who are the heroes.
We just can't simply use that as a
not-
crutch.
Uncritically assume that rebel always good.
Yeah, that's the ultimate point we're trying to make here.
Yes.
In fact, wouldn't it be interesting if what appeared to be a fairly typical like Star Wars ripoff became, wait a minute, the Empire is actually the good guys here,
Yeah.
and I'm part of a terrorist organization.
I suppose a little. I suppose a little sneak preview, because we haven't finished the show yet, but we're gonna do an episode on it. But
The show
Arcane.
Sure, yeah.
There are forces in the underground city that think, we need to fight against this oppressive over city that, is better off than we are, and they're oppressing us and holding us down. Meanwhile, there's people on the upper city that are built over that are trying to maintain a society that is approaching just,
I mean, there's still problems with it, obviously,
Yeah.
structurally, or else the underground wouldn't have problems.
and what's the big punchy man's name again?
Big Punchy Man?
The
Yeah,
dad.
the dad, yeah. In
Been
Arcane.
too long since I've seen it.
Yeah.
Oh,
But anyway, his point is that, sometimes you need to be able to put up with, you have to sort of hold back those notions of rebellion and destruction because they bring
and
just
Vi's
that,
like, but I
destruction.
want to punch things.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll talk about that.
We'll
show
talk about
when we
that
get
more in
finished
depth.
with it.
But it's sort of a contrast from your usual rebellion trope because, sometimes you see that, it turns out chaos and destruction are fruits of acts of rebellion when not properly thought out or executed.
Anarchy isn't stable.
Who'd have
Who'd have
thought?
thought?
Thunk.
Yeah. So I guess those are the main points I had thought of. I guess if there's any other.
I brought up most of the stuff that I thought I would want to bring up.
I guess so. In a society in which rebellion means conforming to the way we want to do things,
'Cause honestly, that's a lot of the social rebellions now, where it's like no one is conforming to my group's ideals. We need to make everyone conform to our ideals. It's like we're the only people that hold these ideals. That makes us a minority, and therefore that's minorities are always good, unquestionably, in pop culture.
Yeah.
because they don't want to step on any toes.
and the sort of reaction we've seen in recent years is sort of the return with the V movement, right? Where is sort of a counter rebellion. It's like, let's go back to the things before.
Return
That,
to
in
monkey.
a lot of cases, never really existed as such to begin with.
Especially not in the way you think of them many years later in kind of the hermeneutics that you use to view them.
Turns out you can only inhabit the time and customs of which you are currently living.
Yeah. To
Customs-
translate yourself into a time in which you don't live is not, in fact, transporting you back to that time at all.
No.
It's just like I was talking about in the Hidden Life episode. Like, I can't go be an Austrian farmer in the Alps. Like, that's just, that's not possible. It's, even if I were to kind of live that life precisely as they lived it then, it still wouldn't be it. Because I am formed by the environment in which I have grown up. I have informed and formed by so many things. Like, it simply won't be the same because I've lived a very different life.
So what is the Catholic response then to these circumstances?
Well, first
And that's
of
a
all,
question many people are working
yeah,
on.
that
right
is
now.
a question many people.
So we're just taking a stab at it for the sake of conversation.
discussing the trope of rebellion in media that seems
think-
ridiculously prevalent.
I think the real response is that we should get a group together. We should be in charge.
Turns out
dang
the
it,
real rebellion
was
was
the
the friends we made along the way.
Anyway, sorry, Riley. You had a
Anyway,
serious response.
I did have a serious response. I think, first of all, it behooves us to acknowledge, as I was saying, the good that they're trying to do.
Yeah.
That correcting injustice is in fact a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And just like when you're in dialogue with people who are kind of this mind, you just be like, yeah, I acknowledge that what you're trying to do here is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we disagree on first principles, which is going to cause us to disagree on what we do from here. So you kind of have to work from a place of understanding. Like, yeah, let's both try to acknowledge the good that each other are doing. And this is just inherently easier for you to do as a Catholic than it is for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because we live in modernity and we have very modern ways that we think about things. And it's just inherently more familiar to us. Well, it's not inherently, that's not quite true, but it's just more familiar to us because of how we've been formed and the world in which we've grown up, particularly in the West, in America.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, just like, this is something I do when I talk to people. I was like, I bet you that I could articulate your position to your satisfaction and that you could not do the same for me.
Yeah.
And that's usually a pretty eye-opening experience for people because they're like, okay, like you
actually listened.
I don't actually understand you. Firstly, like, yeah, you would take the time to articulate my position in words that satisfy me. Like, yeah, that's what I'd say.
Mm-hmm.
And to realize that they cannot do the same. Now, some people are they're very angry about it, and that's a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that's a position in which you just kind of have to acknowledge their anger and, like, you know.
Their indignation is like sort of that human tendency
it's
to have the desire for justice.
Precisely. That's what anger does. It tells us about injustice. And
When it's oriented correctly.
when it's oriented correctly. And it always does. It just, yeah, that's kind of a separate can of worms that might be an episode topic I do because it was kind of the focus of my whole last year of formation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's very interesting stuff. Yeah, so acknowledge the affective side of things. That's super, super important because most people act out of like subjective things, whether they want to or not. Like, you might internally believe this lie that nobody loves me. And like, even if you can prove to yourself that in fact people do love you, you act out of that belief. And so, like, finding those sorts of
I know
things,
people personally, this is the case for them.
You see stuff like this a lot. And so those things are really powerful for the human person because we're embodied. We're not just minds in a jar piloting a robot. Our emotions impact us really significantly. And so hitting on this affective side of things, like, enables us to establish common ground and help people feel understood.
Yeah. Well, and that's really...
So that you can proceed with the argument in a more coherent way.
That's really, I guess, the Catholic response then is like, Christ desires communion with us and us with each other.
Right.
You know, go therefore and baptize all nations. Right. Like, we literally join in him in baptism, in the Eucharist, you know, Holy Communion. All are, you know, one under God, right? That's the idea. And so whatever form that may take in your life requires some discernment. Because obviously you have like if you're, you know, practicing Catholic, you have your parish, your friends, your, you know, those you care about, that are your family, what have you. And then there's sort of the evangelistic duty we have as Christians to spread the good news and whatnot. But yeah, I guess really rebellion is about trying to come up with a new idea to solve an old problem. But sometimes the solutions to the problems are not new solutions.
Ultimately, not every disease requires invasive transplant surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And so rebellion isn't always appropriate whenever a single symptom appears.
Mm-hmm.
There are certainly times and places and stories where it's definitely like the way to go.
Yeah.
But I think it would be more interesting if stories decided to introduce a little nuance to their political
Because sometimes
problems.
what is needed is reform and renewal rather than complete upheaval.
But as long as there's a person we can all point to and say, let's kill that guy,
Yeah.
and then our problems will be solved, right?
It powerfully unites people. That kind of, like
It's a very
very
ancient,
clear things. Like it creates this disparity, us against them kind of thing. Plays on our kind of tribal instincts, and it's just like it's a really powerful mover.
Which is why these stories are so effective.
That's one of the many reasons.
One of the reasons.
But like,
Yeah. Yeah, I guess one thing we see is that we've reached a point where a lot of people are noticing how writing in films and movies and writing in films and TV and so forth
like,
these days has sort of fallen off because more and more over time writers are losing grasp. Writers, directors, filmmakers, storytellers are losing grasp of what even, the ideas that they're talking about. Like they're becoming more and more distant from the tradition in which these things
You're just painting
were formed.
by numbers that were written over top of a different painting that was also painted by numbers.
that bears a passing similarity, but doesn't quite fit.
Right.
They keep saving something and reopening it in Microsoft Paint over and over again until it is
Until the loss is stacked up enough.
to where it's irrecognizable.
It's like a meme at this point.
Yeah.
It's like the ground control to Major Tom meme you sent me in the group chat. It's like a Subway sandwich, and every line of text has been blocked out and replaced with something else.
Yeah.
In this case, it's like references to ground control to the Space Odyssey by David Bowie with random "My brother in Christ, I'm floating" in a most peculiar way. It's like several layers of things removed from what the original intent was. This is humor, and this is just us being.
And you can see how we got here if you've been following the history and kind of the trends of these memes. But
If you look at it-
without that context, this is just nonsense. Like. And that's part of what makes it funny to us who like memes.
Right,
Because-
you know where it comes from, but you also know it's nonsense, and that's silly.
Here's the thing with memes, though, is that, what is a meme but like an idea shared among human beings?
Right. It's the means of cultural transmission of
yeah.
information. Like,
Which
Yeah.
we're talking about
It's
a
the same-
meme.
precisely
The
what
rebel
it is.
meme.
It's
Show me the rebel meme.
It's the same.
There you go. It's the rebel meme.
Read me the report. What say the rebel memes?
We lost many Bothans for this information.
Yeah, but it's the same mechanism by which shared ideas are formulated into films and like popular culture.
And stories in general.
Yeah. So there's a reason why there's like a psychological, almost physiological reason for these things working, right? And so the more divorced from, I won't say Christendom because that's kind of
It's a loaded term.
yeah, but the more divorced from God society becomes, the less sense the world makes, because it turns out if you turn your back on truth,
Well, just like the less eye to truth. Like you see,
Yeah.
like the Greeks had a really strong system 300 some years before Christ. And we owe a lot to them philosophically in terms of the way we articulate a lot of our teaching. But that's therein lies the difference. Like they sought truth. They thought truth possible. And in fact were convicted of its existence.
but it still had to be revealed to man before it could be fully
The
realized.
fullness of truth had to
Yeah.
be revealed. There was much that could be ascertained by reason, but we aren't even looking for it anymore.
No.
In fact, we assert that such truth does not exist. By and large.
All of the great Greek myths and stuff were about that search for truth, ultimately symbolically.
Yeah.
What are our myths today about?
It's the reason why I still call, whenever I refer to the Reformation, as the Protestant Revolt, because it's sort of a rejection of like tradition and truth as it has been handed down through the ages, right? It's like
In broad strokes.
in broad strokes. Yeah.
It's-
We don't have time to get into
That-
an
that's a whole
entire
other can
discussion
worms.
of
And if you're Protestant listening to this,
intellectual
don't forget
foundations.
it's tough, I guess.
really it's more Occam's fault than it is anyone else's.
True.
But that's something I just love to intellectually scapegoat William of Ockham because it's all his fault.
It's all, yeah.
Him and that damn razor.
He alone is not part of the broad philosophical tradition of the whole of history. He alone is the source of all of the intellectual scourge.
How is there
We're
not?
pointing at one guy and saying, he's the problem. If we
He's the
get rid of
problem.
him, all of our problems are solved.
If we just stop believing voluntarism, everything will be better, right? At least I'm self-aware about it.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. We are joking about this.
Also, stay tuned for our web-based men's toiletries business called Occam's Razors. How somebody hasn't? Why am I putting this on the internet?
Cut that out.
Yeah.
We gotta save that idea.
Now I gotta start. I just gotta open up another business. And,
Just buy the domain now.
yeah. Anyway,
Anyway.
well, I guess that's all I had to say about that.
Yeah.
For the most part,
It
it was an interesting discussion. This was kind of fun.
This was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You should have.
Let us know in the comments.
What you think of this? Yeah,
What
it's
do you
something
think of this
different.
format?
Do you think we should do more? Yeah, do you have suggestions? Where can they reach us if they have suggestions about things we should
Oh
talk
yeah,
about?
we have a Palladium Papers Gmail that we only ever get like automated emails from our various online accounts for things. So
And ever so often when we bug John to formally send us his requests for things.
I've had siblings like, hey, you should talk about this. I'm like, if you want us to talk about something, submit a formal question because that email needs to get used. So what's the email?
PalladiumPapists@gmail.com.
Where else can they listen to this aside from where they're currently listening?
Yeah, there's Apple. If you're on Spotify, it's Apple Podcasts. If you're on Apple Podcasts, it's Spotify. Those are your two options. That's where we at.
Wherever you're listening now, we
you
should
can
still
look
be
at
there.
all 2 pages of our website if you want. I mean,
If you want to, be our editor or something, you could see the third page.
hey,
I haven't even seen the third page.
yeah.
I'm very divorced from the back end stuff you guys do. I just sit on
Yeah.
a chair and talk.
The back end took the kids. I now realize how that could be construed after.
Anyway, thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you.
Okay, love you,
Next
bye.
If we ever
So-
financially recover from this, we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Later.
See ya.